Hello, hello. I am Amy McInnes. This is The Art of Plenty. I am an entrepreneur. I am a mother of 5. I'm a clinical counselor. I've been married for a very long time, and I am a person who loves to grow, who loves to change, and who is interested in hacking my behaviors because I want to live my best life. I want to be the best version of myself that I can be. This is part 2 of our Behavior Hack series, where we are diving into the question of how come I don't do the things that I say that I want to do? Or how come I can't start the things that I say that I want to start? This is a serious question for me because it's something that I have asked myself many times over the years whenever I'm trying to implement some type of change in my life. The last week's episode, we dove into identifying what the behavior is that you're trying to either start or the behavior that you are trying to stop. If you didn't listen to that part, go back and listen to it now, because that really sets the stage up for today when we are talking about the different parts and the different motivations that contribute to why we don't actually start the behavior we want to start, or why we can't stop the behavior that we want to stop. We have created a mini book for you. And if you go to the show description, there is a link to download this free mini book. The mini book is important because it's where you get to take the stuff that we're talking about in this episode and last episode and next episode and really apply it to your own life. It's a way of not just listening to good information, but digesting good information. I don't want you just to hear this. I want you to be able to implement this. I want you to be able to create change in your life, because that's what the Art of Plenty really is about for me. And the workbook is a tool that you can utilize in order to create that change and really utilize this as a behavior hack. Get the mini book, print it out, read it over, get working on it. Next thing, this is part 2. So next week is part 3, where we really learn to apply the strategies that we've been talking about last week and this week in order to create lasting change. Make sure that you have subscribed to wherever you're listening, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or on YouTube, so that you don't miss when the next episode comes out. Because the 3rd episode, it gets good. That's where the change really happens. Well, I don't know. Is that true? I really feel like change happens all along the way. But it's the part where I say, we've got the information now. Now, what do you do with it? The reason why this has been split up into 3 is because this kind of work takes time. This kind of work takes energy. You need to be in a place where you can process, where you can think, where you can talk it out. However you do your work to get to the bottom of things, you need space and time to do that. The reason why we've broken it down into these 3 distinct steps is to give you an opportunity to really digest it and take away from it. Because when we slow down and are purposeful in our self-work, in our personal development, that's where we can create and get lasting change. Because we don't just cover the surface, we really dive in. So this is something that you're meant to really think about, because sometimes the answers don't come quickly. Sometimes it takes time to unearth and unroot things. And that's why we've spread this out over 3 episodes. So last week we talked about identifying the behavior, and we kind of came up with 2 different directions you can go. If it's a behavior that you are trying to start, like face yoga, which was my example, or if you're trying to stop a behavior, like eating chips late at night, also something that I need to stop. Now, the reason why it can be difficult to start a behavior, even though you want to do it, or stop a behavior, even though you want to stop it, is because there's not just one reason or one specific part of you that is connected to that behavior. There are all sorts of things that are at work that are influencing the reason why you're not doing it or the reason why you are doing something. And your commitment level to those different parts will impact what behavior comes out of it. So that's what we're diving into. Now, this exercise today has two parts. I like to break things down. So we've got two parts. The first part is we're going to be uncovering some of the motivations and the beliefs related to these behaviors. The second part is we're going to talk about the emotional cost. So stick around because that is juicy. Okay. I've broken down the first part even further into two parts because the reasons why we do things, in my mind, are happening because of internal influences and because of external influences. So we're going to start first with the internal influences. Each behavior that we do has a cost and a benefit to us. And we experience these both internally and we experience them externally. Our behaviors are very rarely limited to being impacted. I'm going to try that sentence again. Each behavior has a cost or a benefit to it. And we experience these costs both internally and externally. So let's talk about internally. When we talk about our sense of self, when we talk about who we are as a person, what do you think of? What is your internal person that is influencing the choices that you make? For myself, I always think of myself in terms of my physical body, my emotional, so my emotions, my mental, which I equate to as my mind. And oftentimes I will combine soul and mind, or emotions and mind, to be what I would say is my soul. But I really do see those as separate things, my emotions from my mind, even though all of this stuff is integrated because it's all one person and we don't separate ourselves. So our body doesn't get to go to work without our emotions, just like our mind doesn't go to work without our emotions, which is why I'm such a huge fan of learning how to live an integrated life. And the fourth part that I always consider when I think of self is I think of spirit. So a lot of people will associate spirit and soul together as one. I feel like my spirit is different than my emotions and my mind and my physical body. So I kind of see that these four proponents make up who I am as a person. And as I mentioned a moment ago, none of these are operating in isolation. I myself am one person with these four parts. And those are big parts, and we're going to break up parts even further when we get into this. Just stick with me. If this is getting confusing, stick with me. Look in the workbook. The workbook lays it out in a way that it's easy to follow and easy to understand. I like thinking of self as an integrated self and recognizing that all of these different things are coming to play. And that's why we have that course that I created about the integrated life, which is about work and life, because you cannot separate how you feel about something, how your emotional response is, from your body, because your emotions will impact how your body moves and your health. Just like the mind that you have and the way you think about things can impact your emotions. All of these things are interconnected. So when we look at our behaviors, when we are identifying things that we don't want to do or things that we do want to do, we're looking at the different parts that are contributing to the reason why we do things or the reason why we don't do things. So if we take those four components, can we apply each of those things to this behavior? So for example, eating salt and vinegar chips. The physical component of why I do that behavior The part of me that is motivated in that situation, if I break my physical down into different senses, I love the taste. I love the sound of the crunch. Those things of eating, the way it tastes, the way it smells, those things are part of the reason why I eat chips. I don't just, in fact, it's probably the full reason why I eat chips is probably completely related to the physical component of it. No, that's not true. There's an emotional component. The emotional component is that association that I have between eating chips and relaxation, which I talked about in part 1. It's associated to the beach with me and summer memories. So there's an emotional component to why I eat chips. There's a physical component to why I eat chips. There's a mental piece for it for me because I'm getting a break. I'm getting an opportunity to turn my mind off. That's what happens when I relax and eat chips at night. The spiritual piece, not really relevant in this behavior. And I bring that up because as you go through the workbook and you look at these different elements, there may be parts where it's very obvious to you that, yeah, this is a part of me that's being served by this behavior, or this is a part of me that's being served by not doing this behavior. Or you might find that, no, that part's pretty silent, and that's okay. Like the spiritual component for me with eating chips and face yoga, it's a little bit not there. Except for it shows up when I boil down to my why, when I boil down to those core values and I think about the connection to being who I'm called to be. That's where I can pull the spiritual component. But for the most part, these behaviors are pretty far removed from that. When we think about why we're doing behaviors, we think about what is coming to play. What is it that is actually motivating me or influencing me to do something? Because I don't want to eat the chips because of the stomach ache, because it makes me unhealthy. But there's other parts of me that do want to eat the chips because the physical part, it tastes so good, or the emotional part of, oh, it's associated with relaxation. By identifying those different motivations, those are coming into play. And it's almost like there's a scale. So is the physical piece of how good they taste, that goes on to the one side. And then we throw on top of that the emotional piece, like, oh, it feels good to have a break. And then that scale tips down further and further. Whereas sitting up on this other side of the scale is the part of like, oh, but I get a tummy ache from the chips. But because that's far removed, because that part of me that doesn't want the tummy ache, it's not weighted as heavy as the other side. That's why I end up eating the chips. When we break down these different motivations, we start to get a clue of why it's weighted the way it is and why we're doing things even though we say we don't want to do them, or why we can't start things even when we say that we want to start it. So that aspect that we just talked about is all of the internal motivations, the internal parts that come to play when we're making decisions about our behaviors. Now, there's a whole other side of things, and those are the external influences. Some of the things that I've got on the list are relational pieces, work, hobbies, interests. These are other things that are important to us that are outside of us, but are very much a part of who we are, meaning that our work and our relationship to our finances, it is definitely a part of who we are, but I've separated them into external because they're outside of us as a person, but they still have influence on what we're doing or what we're not doing. So for example, the relational piece. Oftentimes when I'm hanging out, I'm relaxing and eating chips. That's the time that I'm connecting with my husband. It's the end of the day, the kids are in bed or they're settled. It's not always like that, but that's definitely a time when we seem to connect, is at the end of the day. So there is a part of me that wants to connect with him and relax. And that's one of the reasons why doing face yoga is so difficult, because there's the relational component of that where we're not connecting because I'm doing my own thing. And when we're eating chips together, we're doing something together. So we're connecting. So it's serving and it's benefiting my relationship. Whereas the face yoga is taking away from the relationship. So that relationship is an external factor that is impacting my behaviors to not do face yoga and to eat chips. I'm not sure where these fall for you, but just like the spiritual component piece, there are things from the external list that may not be influencing this behavior. For example, hobbies doesn't really come into play. My personal interests don't really impact these behaviors, the chip eating and the face yoga. It's just not relevant. But the behavior that you are trying to change or implement could very much be impacted by your hobbies or your work. So when you go through the workbook, the idea is to get a sense of what external factors are contributing to you either doing that behavior or not doing that behavior. The second part, so we talked about what are the motivations behind what are the beliefs behind these behaviors, which is when we're diving into whether they're internal reasons or external reasons, and we're looking at the benefit and the cost of these behaviors. The other piece that stands out for me that I wanted to dive into, this is where it gets juicy, is about what is the emotional cost to you to not stop that behavior or to not start that behavior that you're wanting to start. This is a big deal because when you have that misalignment between I want to do something, but I'm not doing it, the result of that feeling, the result of that conflict is this sense of guilt or shame or disappointment in yourself. Like, why can't I do what I say that I want to do? How come I don't have follow through? How come I don't have grit? How come I'm not doing what I say that I want to do? I'm saying I want to do it and I can't get going. There is an emotional cost to you when you feel that way. And at some point, you either have to do the behavior or stop the behavior, depending on what kind of behavior you're doing, because it could be starting or stopping. At some point, you either have to do that or you have to stop feeling bad that you're not doing it. And that's okay too. Just because you want to do something and you can't do it now, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be in that position. Face yoga, it seems silly, but I'm just going to use it as an example because that's what we've been talking about, is something that I want to do. I'm not doing it. Get over it. If you're not going to do it and you go through this work in the workbook and you make it through part 1 and you make it through part 2 and it's what's coming out is that you are realizing that you don't want to give up those parts of you that are in opposition to doing the face yoga. You don't want to give those parts up because those parts, whether they're internal or external, those parts have value to you. And now that you're seeing them for what they are, it doesn't outweigh that reason that you dug down and uncovered in part 1. That's okay. Just because you wanted to do something doesn't mean you still have to want to. It's your life. You get to choose. You don't have to do it. And just because you decide, like face yoga, I'm like, I don't actually want to do that right now. Yeah, it's something I want to do, but I don't want to do it enough right now. But you know what? I might feel different in 3 months. I might feel different next year. That's okay. You can table things in your life and be like, that's a behavior that I'm going to try to pick up later. Or I just am not ready to give that up just yet. Because what I'm getting from that is far greater than what I feel like I will gain by giving it up in this time in my life. That's great. Do those things, but don't hold on to guilt or shame or embarrassment because you're not doing what it is that you said you wanted to do. That emotional cost to you of feeling bad about yourself doesn't set you up for success. So let go of those preconceived notions that you need to be something or you need to do something, because maybe you don't. Maybe this exercise, maybe listening to this podcast today isn't about figuring out a way to do the thing that you say you want to do. Maybe it's figuring out that, oh, that's not actually what I need to be doing right now. And that's like lifting a weight off your shoulders. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's like just like stretching like this and just pulling your shoulders back and letting the tension out of your neck, rolling your head. Because sometimes we just need to lift that weight that we've put on ourselves. That's why the Art of Plenty is here. It's to help offer ideas about where to go, about what you can do so that you can be living the life that you were meant to live, living a life that is full of hope and that has freedom. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening. I hope you've got the workbook. It's so good. It's so good to have intention around our personal development and to not just listen to things, but listen to things and digest things and take things and utilize them and do the work so that we come away changed. Make sure you hit subscribe, whether you're on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, so that you know when the next episode comes out. Because next week, we're finishing up this mini-series and we are going to be figuring out and discussing how to apply these strategies so that you can do the things that you say you want to do or stop the things that you say you want to stop. I'm so glad you're here. It's an honor that you would listen. And if the behavior that you're trying to start or stop is connected to an addiction, please find a professional in your area and get help. This messaging is intended to be for entertainment and to offer some insight. It's not professional advice. And there are some situations where that is what is warranted. So I just want to encourage you to reach out and get the help you need and subscribe so that we can connect next week where we get to dive in and apply these strategies. I'm Amy McInnes. This is The Art of Plenty.